we're back and we're moving into our first conversation for this morning as we start talking about the child protection system in Belize. We're joined at this time by the Director of the Department of Human Services, Lliani, and we're also joined by the Human Development Coordinator for Child Protection Services at the Department of Human Services, Ganesha. Good morning and
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, ladies, I want to thank you for being here. We know that you have a very challenging job that never stops, but it is a great opportunity for us to be able to kind of remind people of the services that are available and just some of the work that you undertake at the department. So let's just start off with an overview, Lliani.
Okay. In terms of the Ministry of Human Development, Social Transformation and Poverty Alleviation, I just wanted the public to know that it is comprised of three departments, Human Services being one of them. But the other departments are also the Women and Family Support Department and also the Community Rehabilitation Department. Those sister departments work closely with us in terms of meeting the needs of the populations that we serve. Community rehabilitation deals with children in conflict with the law. And we always equate the children within that system as the second half of the child protection system. So there are still children in need of protection, but possibly because of some of the experiences that they've had, you then see the other end in terms of their acting out behaviors. And then our Women and Family Support Department looks at wraparound services for families, looks at what are crises that families are going through and how can they fill that in terms of public assistance services, in terms of the Boost program, in terms of the food pantry program that many people have heard about. They also provide response in terms of elder services, in terms of homeless services as well. And we work together in terms of wrapping services around families. In terms of Department of Human Services, we have 4 units, the Community and Parenting Empowerment Program. So we look at this as the prevention arm of the department in terms of how do we support families to do what is their God-given responsibility in terms of caring for their children, and how do we support them to do that. We all recognize that nobody wakes up one day and knows how to be a parent, and that it can be a very challenging experience. And so the aim of this unit is to support, and how do we garner a program to help parents navigate the stormy weather of parenting. One of the key initiatives that we're looking at as a system as well is how do we interface with families and children earlier. And so one of the aspects of this unit is also looking at early childhood stimulation services. And so how do we engage with parents early when they have children between 0 to 3 and teach them early bonding, teaching them stimulation, early literacy and all of that, so that parents are equipped from very early. And we believe that early bonding helps with some of the issues that we then see later within the child protection system. And then of course, child protection services, which we will be talking about today. We also have the child placement and specialized services, which is a complementary to child protection. So when children come into care and are in need of protection, we want to look at what are the alternatives in terms of safe spaces for children. And so this unit complements. And I remember we launched our Give Your Heart to a Child campaign. So this is the unit that takes the lead in terms of that campaign and appeals to the public, partner with us and help us care for our most vulnerable children by fostering, adopting, or providing respite services for children in care. They also do a key component that we call international casework. We're seeing a rising phenomenon of children crossing our borders, migrant children. We call them unaccompanied minors and accompanied minors. And so what that means is that an unaccompanied minor would be a child under 18 that is crossing into the borders without any guardian or legal guardian with them. And so basically they're unaccompanied. And so those children are in need of protection and are referred to us by the Immigration and Police Department. And then the accompanied children are children that may be with their parents, but their parents may have been detained temporarily by police or immigration. And so they are referred to us for temporary care until the situation of their parents are sorted out. So this unit also does the liaison with the relevant embassies in our country in terms of looking at how do we plan for these children, in looking at how do we get them back home or back to their parents.
Let me just get a point of clarification there when you talk about unaccompanied or accompanied minors. What do we do with the children once, what do you do to children once they're put in your care?
Yeah, we place them within the child protection system in terms of either residential care or foster care.
Okay.
And so we ensure that they're safe until we can sort out the situation with their parents. For unaccompanied minors, we would work with the embassies and ask them to verify nationality of the child, verify the age of the child, and for them to advise us in terms of what is the circumstance of the child back in their country of origin. And they would then guide us in saying that this child can be repatriated, and then we facilitate the repatriation of the child.
Okay.
While they're in care, we also refer to the ATIPS police unit, and they would also do a screening in terms of whether there are any indicators or elements of trafficking. Because we recognize that any child and movement across the borders creates vulnerability for exploitation. And so we want to ensure that these children have not been exploited and that they are safe as well. And then our last unit is the Alternative Care and Trafficking Unit. And so this unit looks at coordination of victim care services for trafficking victims, both children and adults. And they also manage the residential facilities that we have under our responsibility. So I know that's a lot.
Yes, yes.
How big is your staff again?
It's just over like 170 something
country.
for Department of Human Services.
Yeah.
For the whole ministry, it's I guess about 300 staff.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's big. I was going to say, you guys sound like you have a lot on your plate.
Yes.
I'm curious to know, what is the concentrated issues that you get from young persons that access the services from your department? Is it solely probably one main issue that you have to deal with, but what is the ratio of it?
I guess when we look at referrals to us within child protection, we get referrals for sexual abuse, we get referrals for physical abuse, neglect, like I said, trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation. So a whole range of protection issues may come into us. We find that children who are orphaned become more vulnerable and are referred for services in terms of stabilization of where will be the safe space for them to stay. I don't know if Ms. Smith can think of any other issues.
No, I think that covers most of it.
Now, perhaps this department is the one that tends to have the bad rap with the public. We call it locally just social take me picnic. In fact, that's probably the statement that you hear the most. And it's a very common thing that we hear. How would you explain, because it's a tiered approach, right? In terms of when you actually reach the point where a child is taken out of the home. Talk to us about how you move through those tiers and what will qualify for the removal of a child.
Okay. So working in the child protection system, there is a partnership between different ministries and organizations. So we would partnership with Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, some of the NGOs and the judiciary system. And how it works is that when a case should come into the department, what we would do is to send an officer in to assess the situation and to see what's the level of the severity of the abuse. If it is that we see that we have parents who would cooperate with us, we would work with them. They understand that they have done something wrong. They're willing to participate in any of the interventions that we would put forth to them, maybe parenting, anger management, doing counseling through NDAC or regular therapeutic counseling. We would then work with families. We would work with children and have them maintained at home. Where we would have to have maybe what we call a supervisory order, which gives us some level of authority to go into the homes at any given time to follow up, to check in. Our parents who sometimes have some level of resistance towards us, but are still open for the help. And where we would have complete removal is when we cannot find maybe relative as alternative placement for children, where we have parents who outrightly would tell us that they refuse to work with us, where we have parents who are the perpetrators of these abuse and are in somewhat of a denial that they have even done something wrong, then that would definitely lead us to removal. Some removal are temporarily, some are a little bit longer. But that is pretty much what the system looks like. But it is not that we go in immediately and remove first. We do similarly like police. We go
Like
in, we investigate first, assess the situation, and determine the safety and risk of that child. And then we make a determination if that child needs to be removed or can maintain at home.
No, it's important that we understand this process because very often you rely on outsiders to make reports.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't always the police that refers you. Sometimes it's a neighbor or
Yes.
somebody who passed by and sees something. And if I call and I say, listen, I saw this person beating their child, and I call and I don't see the child removed, perhaps I'm not around when you're going to investigate, I'll say, why bother call again? They didn't do anything. Well, how do you respond to that?
That's interesting. We have gotten several calls like that. We have even gotten malicious phone calls. If you and your neighbor get into a quarrel, I will call social on you and all of that. But it's just for people to know, as long as a report is made into the department, an officer will be assigned and an investigation will take place.
Yeah.
It could have been where we were able to deal with that situation on a one-time set off. So it means that we have spoken to the parents, we understand what happened, we gave them some tips as how to deal with issues, not to get all overwhelmed and then become abusive to the child. So you might see that happening and they might think that nothing has been done, but I can assure them that an officer has gone in to see what's happening.
Is there a tracking system that's used? So, you know, if I can follow up on a report and at least be sure, because we want people to exercise or to be part of the village to help raise the children and report things.
Well, I mean, we are encouraged to follow up, but there's so much information that we can give because we cannot reach confidentiality. Even though you have made a report, we can say to you, yes, a report has been looked into, it has been investigated, and we are monitoring, or the child is doing fine. But that is as far as we would be able to tell you.
Okay.
Is the process or the steps taken to protect a child different from male to female?
No,
No, it's not.
it's the same thing across the board.
Now talk to us about what, I mean, I'm trying to imagine what it must be like to be in your role, to encounter parents in just different phases, whether it's just frustrated and didn't know how to deal with the child to perhaps just not caring. How do you approach these situations and be able to ensure that the rights of the child and the proper care of the child is the primary objective? Because I know that's what you set out to do.
And I think it goes back to what Mrs. Smith said in terms of going back to the steps, no? In terms of having parents understand what is the system and what is our role in terms of supporting them in terms, like I mentioned earlier, their God-given right to parent their children. And so I think education is the first step in terms of what is the legal parameters in terms of their responsibility. And ultimately, the first responsibility to care and protect and ensure safety of children are parents. And so we want to validate that and reassure parents that that is our objective as well. And so we recognize that our intervention may sometimes come across as invasive, but that is not our intent. And if we reverse a little bit in terms of looking at the whole child protection system, it's not only human services and police. And like she alluded to, the system encompasses a whole system of agencies that is designed to support the family. So if we step back to the beginning in terms of birth of a child, your first interface is usually with an institution, which is the medical facilities. And so they're the first gap in terms of support to you. When your child grows, you then go and enter the education system. And so they also have a role to play in terms of supporting the family and creating that support for them. Where the Department of Human Services and the police often have to step in is when there's a signal and a warning that there's been some deterioration in terms of that parenting role and that something has fallen short. And so when the social workers go in, that is the approach, to let the parents know that somebody cared enough in terms of making a report. Of course, they're angry and they're like, it's not their business
imagine.
and all of that. And so a lot of times the social workers have to navigate that first engagement process, which can be very hostile, you know, but they are trained to be professional, to recognize and validate the feelings of parents and to express back to parents that we understand your anger, but it's from a place of to damage your family, to hurt your family, but somebody cared that there's something wrong. So let's talk. What's happening? You know, somebody was concerned enough to call to say that this child is being physically abused or this child possibly is being sexually abused. That's a serious thing.
Yes.
And I think you care too to know what's happening with your child. So let's talk about that. And I think engagement is critical in terms of parents building that trust with us, in terms of realizing that we're there for a purpose, not because we just want to get in your business.
Yeah.
And so I think after that, then we can talk about, is it true? Is the abuse report through? And we do that through several things. So if it's for sexual abuse, we will talk about the need for a medical exam. We will talk about the need to interview all parties to determine if there's validity to the report. A lot of times in sexual abuse, the protocol talks about going to where the child is first. So we need parents to understand that because we don't know who is hurting that child, the first interface may be with the child. And then our protocol says that at least within that same day that we engage parents to let them know a report has come in and that we've interviewed your child and we now want to hear from you in terms of what may be happening in your family. Some parents will talk about, well, you don't have a right to talk to my child without me knowing.
I was going to ask that. Can you talk to the child
Legally,
without the parents?
yes.
In a case of sexual abuse, so you could go to, let's say, their school.
Yes.
And talk to that child without the parent knowing.
Yes, the Family and Children's Act gives us the authority to respond. And it says that we are to go wherever the child is and to conduct an interview. And especially we will do this if the allegation is against a parent. Because we have to recognize that at this point we don't know the parent. We don't know what are the circumstances. We don't know if there will be possible intimidation of that child to not disclose. And so we want to get a most neutral interview as possible. And so what we would do is do that first interview with the child, engage with the parents, and then we normally re-interview the child. Now, if we see discrepancies between the first interview and the follow-up interview, it raises other alert flags in terms of what Mrs. Smith talked about, the cooperation of the parents to take ownership if there is something deteriorating within their family. But if they're being very deceptive, they're lying to us, and they're not, and intimidating the child, it increases the safety and risk factors for that child. And so when she talked about the determinant for removal, we're looking at all these factors in terms of, can you create a safe space for this child to disclose, to talk about what's happening to her, and are you going to create a safe environment for your child, or will you continue to harm your child?
In the cases where you have confirmed the sexual abuse of a child, how often is it that the parent knows?
That's a good question.
Just average percentage.
It's hard to say because sometimes parents do know and they refuse to say.
They don't want to admit.
Some of them are in denial because of their circumstances. And so it's hard to say what that looks like, what that number looks like.
Yeah.
What we have found, though, is that for parents who don't know, and when they find out, take immediate action to ensure their children's protection, that we see that children are able to heal and to recover from that abuse because they feel that they're believed and that they're supported through that trauma.
What are the signs that parents should look for?
In terms of a child being abused?
Sexually abused,
I mean, if you know your child, a very vibrant, active child, you will see some withdrawal, you will see some aggression, the child becomes very, very angry, the child start to display a lot of behavioral issues, starting to rebel. Those are really the main signs that you would definitely see outright if you should know your child.
Or maybe all of a sudden you notice they don't want to go around certain family members anymore. And what was once normal now becomes an anxiety for the child. That's a big clue that you need to look out for. And we've talked about this before. I think in terms of previous times that we've been here, that this whole phenomenon of don't force children to go with certain people or force them to
Hug or kiss.
hug and kiss people if they're telling you obviously either through their nonverbal behavior or through their verbal behavior that they don't want
They're
to.
uncomfortable.
And I think the point is for parents to recognize that these are little human beings and they, just like me and you, they have feelings, they have their preferences, their wishes. It could be nothing.
Yes.
It could be that abuse is not happening, but even so, listen to them. Because the relationship that you form with your child kind of navigates how they would handle a more serious situation like abuse should it be happening. And so it's important for you to respect the child's right to choice, just like all of us.
I think what you'd mentioned either on or off camera in a previous interview has really struck me, just in terms of the fact that if there's nothing and you teach a child that because this adult wants to hug or kiss you, you should comply. In a case of abuse,
They feel like they don't have a choice.
Precisely. And I think once you put it in that perspective, it really makes you understand what we're teaching children. They say you must go hug her or kiss her or...
Because then it becomes a power thing that, oh, because that person is bigger than me, then I must do what they say. So in a situation when that person is crossing their boundary lines with that child, then the child feels like, well, this is an adult and I'm taught to respect and obey adults at all costs. You know?
But even in addition to that, we talk about adults and you should respect adults. We also have been teaching our children not to talk to strangers, not to talk to people you don't know. But most of the cases that we're seeing are people who the children are familiar with, or family members. So that is something
who should be protecting.
Exactly.
That's insane to actually know. I'm curious to know though, how do you guys deal with situations where perhaps the victim is the one that's very reluctant to speak out, perhaps because of not wanting to be one that is placed in a system, or not wanting to have, you know, that negative connotation of being abused, and not wanting, you know, friends or other persons to know what happened to you? How do you deal with situations like that?
Well, for us, our mandate is what is in the best interest of the child. And so while we would want the criminal aspect to be dealt with, we need to look at what is in the best interest of that particular child. Psychosocial, the mental area of that child, how that child functions. And so we need to put things in place first. Maybe the child needs to do some therapeutic counseling. Maybe the child needs to do some mental evaluation to see if there's anything wrong with that child at that point, or whatever he or she is going through, to put the interventions in place first. That is our key. And then look at the criminal aspects, because you don't want to re-victimize that child in the process to get a conviction.
Indeed, I agree.
And that's why it's so scary in terms of what's happening to our communities. And like, when do we have that talk that as a community, how do we put weight on victims and potential victims in terms of our response in public domains? I could remember years ago, we did a session with the media called When Whispers Become Reality. But right now, it's not even whispers. It's how does the loudness of being attacked, of being belittled, demeaned
This is social
on
media
social
blasting.
media. And it's amazing how judgmental we can be when we don't even have all the facts.
Exactly.
And if we as a community can be more empathetic and sensitive to what might be the reality of a situation, we create an environment for children to feel safe to disclose. But if I haven't even disclosed yet, and I'm being attacked and accused of being a slut and all these things that are said in the public domain, you could imagine for a child that, like, see, that's what they
will do to me.
Exactly.
You know?
But I think there's a very common fear that people have, which is, what if it's a false allegation that's being made? So can you tell me just how frequently reports of sexual violence are actually a false allegation?
Rare, no?
Rare, very rare.
Minority. And majority of the children that disclose, and you have to imagine your own situation. And if I would come to you right now and say, share with me your first sexual experience, would that be something you want to freely share with all of Belize and the world? And as an adult, you know, you have to say, well, why don't I want to do that? And why are we expecting children to be able to freely share a traumatic experience that they have gone through? Children don't even understand the concept of what is happening to them, you know, because in terms of sexual development, you know, they're expected to learn about that when they're older, not when you're 5 years old and this person who should be loving you, making you feel safe, is crossing a line that you don't even understand. And so there's a confusion for that child that part of this touch, I'm getting certain attention, but this also does not feel right and I don't want it. And then combine that with the whole issues we're talking about of this is an adult, you're to do what an adult tells you to do. It creates such a confusion in that child and lowering of their self-worth and who
if
they
it's
are.
mom or dad's spouse too, that makes it even harder
for them.
And then you think about for the child, if you walk the child's perspective, oh my goodness, this mom is gentleman, she loves him very much, you know, she takes that on. And worse, if most perpetrators intimidate children by threatening them in some way of if you tell, you know, they'll take you away or they'll take away your siblings. Or sometimes we've seen in cases that they tell them, well, if you do what I say, then I won't touch your sister. And sometimes by the time we get into the case, even though the man told the child that, he had already abused all the children in the home, but yet she felt she was being martyr for her siblings, not knowing that he was already abusing everybody. So if you walk the road of a child, that's a heavy burden for that child to navigate all of that. If we as adults, if we were raped as adults, how horrific and intensifying is that experience for an adult, much less for a child.
I have a theory, and I think I've said it a few times on the show, and we don't have the data to be able to understand. But it seems to me that sexual abuse is far more pervasive in our society than we're willing to accept. And in far more families of all ethnic backgrounds, of all social class, than we are being open about. What are your thoughts in terms of the frequency that you're seeing sexual abuse cases, from the most grotesque that make the media to those who those cases that don't get the limelight of the other cases? How serious is this issue?
When you look at our data, the most reported form of child abuse is neglect. And so that's a whole different discussion in terms of the impact of neglect from a physical perspective and a psychological perspective. But the second most reported is sexual abuse. And so theory tells you that the amount of reported cases is just an indicator of the real problem. So more than likely, how much
There's
is that?
more.
Triple?
So it's like every one case, there are 3 more out there that are
not reported. And so yes, it is very scary in terms of the effects of sexual abuse on a person, from their spirit to their emotions, to their psyche. It diminishes their, like I said, their sense of worth, their sense of who they are. And so if you're clouded in terms of who you are, it affects your ability to thrive. It affects your ability to make goals in terms of what you want for life. And it becomes a slow death in terms of who I am as a person and what I was created for. I think it mixes up your concept of your femininity from a female perspective, and from a male perspective, it also intensifies their sense of their manhood and who they are. And a lot of victims, sorry to interrupt, but a lot of victims often take it on that I somehow caused this, you know, and it's in the therapeutic environment that you have to flip the switch and the script for children to understand that you did not cause this. And it's one thing we want the community to stop, in terms
Stop
of
victim
blaming victims, that they somehow caused this by the way they were dressed
Dressing,
or what they
talk,
did.
Or
what
what
time.
Children do normal behaviors. It's normal for a child to want to hug you. It's normal for a
Yes.
child to want to kiss you. This is how they show affection. That does not give you the right to cross that line and take advantage of that child's vulnerability.
And a 15-year-old is a child.
Yes.
No
Yes.
matter how they
And
look
when we
or
talk
how
about
they
the
act.
15-year-old, let's rewind.
Yeah.
You don't know that child's history and what that child has been through and how possibly that child's boundaries have been broken down from they were 7 when
Yeah.
they were first victimized and sexually abused. And fast forward to 15, that child now becomes a child who feels that, you know, this is what
All I'm
No
worth.
self-worth.
this is all that I'm good for, is for the pleasure of others.
What?
Just let me, because you said something and I don't want to lose the opportunity to
Yes.
be able to bring it out. Male and
That's a good
female
question.
are
That's what I wanted to
abused.
check.
Yes.
Is there a ratio in terms of the frequency?
And males and female
Are abusers. Yeah.
of even sexual. Now, yes, we might not get a lot of reports on it. We've seen a few.
Quite a few.
But in other countries, you are also seeing it. So it's something that we do have to discuss
Yeah.
in terms of either. In Belize, there's these informal discussions. We might not get the reports, but there's often informal discussions. Sometimes we hear it in therapy that boys' first encounters would be fathers who take them
To brothels.
brothel.
to brothels to initiate them
bars.
into manhood.
As
That
children.
is damaging to a young man, and it violates that young man's right to choice, to choose their partner. All of us have a right to choose who we want to be intimate with, and even our boys. And so that's some of the cultural practices that we have to begin to confront and look at what is the effects on children of these practices.
Is there a biological factor that makes it challenging to prove abuse against boys? Because when I think of it, you know, for a little girl, biologically it may be easier to prove some sort of abuse versus a boy where touching would be hard to show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we've had that discussion internally,
Yeah.
and maybe we would need a medical doctor to fully
Tell us about
explain.
it.
Yeah.
Because indeed, when we do the medical exam for boys, sometimes there might not be evidence, even though there's a disclosure
Yeah.
of abuse. But I can't get into the anatomy of that.
Understand.
And we will need a doctor
I
for
know,
that.
I know. No, but it was
Yes.
just a thought that was
Yeah.
triggered in my mind because I know then you also have the process. What about how the laws are set up in terms of being able to prove the abuse? Because while we talk about these cases, we don't hear very often of convictions of these perpetrators.
There's so much there. That's a loaded question.
There's a lot there, but sometimes, like I said, we look at where the child is. And some of these cases that we have seen, children don't want to go through with the process of giving a statement because they don't want to go back to that place to remember the abuse. And if it is
Yes.
something that has been going on for a period of time, they have kind of blocked that out.
Yeah.
So we have had some of that. We have had issues where the judiciary system takes very long, and so the process is drawn out, and children don't want to go back to that place. If we have a case with a 7-year-old and the child becomes 17, the child becomes 18, an adult now, they don't want to go back to that place. So they
Yes.
don't want to interface the law or going to court to go over that again. So those are some of, I think, or flaws where we can improve to ensure that.
So the slowness
process
of the
is
system is one of the
definitely-
challenges. The second is that you said sometimes the victim themselves don't want to follow through.
And it's based on our discussion that we just had. In terms of all that's coming at them, in terms of processing all that's happening to them, if you combine that with lack of support and feeling that they're alone in their
Definitely.
victimization, then they would not have the fortitude to proceed
Continue.
with a criminal case.
But can a child make that decision that they wouldn't follow through
It's
with
not
a
that,
case?
it's a subtle decision in terms of lack of cooperation, in terms of testifying. In terms of the legal structure, there's been initiatives tried.
I was gonna
The law talked about putting in screens within the criminal court, so that a child that is testifying does not have to be looking at the perpetrator. Because you can imagine how intimidating that is. The very person that hurt you, the person that threatened you, is now in front of you. And in a child's mind and perspective, those threats are very real.
Yeah.
But don't we record it on camera sometimes?
That's the vision of the Chief Justice. His vision is that no child will enter adult court. There has been a room set up so far in the PG family court. We have one at Department of Human Services, but it's not yet linked to the court. So in terms of all the judicial reform that's happening, that's where we're aiming for, but we're not quite there yet.
I'd imagine that this would be a critical issue
Yes,
because if you investigate a case of sexual abuse, let's say medically the doctor certified something happened, it doesn't go to the court, that perpetrator is still out there. So even if mommy removed me from that person, that person is
He's
then
still at
free
risk.
to then move on to another child
And we know
victim.
that these perpetrators will choose families with vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And so single moms become vulnerable to these men's charm without realizing that their intent is the child. And so yes, this is a real problem.
Is there a registry established of accusations made or repeat offenders that you rely on?
The Ministry of National Security has established what do you call it? A sexual offenders registry that they're now setting up and doing all the infrastructure. So it's not fully set up yet in terms of us being able to access that. But we do have our internal fam care system that we can search. But then see, that's when the cases come to us. And so the idea of the sexual offenders registry was that you'll be able to be accessed by a wider pool of stakeholders. So if you apply for a job as a teacher, if you know, the Ministry of Education will be able to access it, we would be able to access it so that we can look at who are these people that are applying for jobs with children, things like that.
But you would need a conviction to end up on the list.
Yes. That is for convictions.
So, okay, so I'm trying to, because clearly this is a gap, that we're, a very serious gap. You're seeing, let's say on average, how many cases of sexual abuse per month?
Neglect was about 40-something%, and they were like almost 29% of the total.
And that's
Oh, here it is.
correct.
Yeah. This is the for the year. Yeah, 32%.
32%.
Oh wow, so neglect is almost.
And I mean, I don't have the full court records. We haven't seen that many convictions of sexual abusers.
And it's just to explain the system too, in terms of the two-track system, in terms of our roles, no? So our role is to ensure safety and protection of the child. And the police is the one that determines if a crime has been committed. They have to consult with the DPP's office in terms of bringing a case before. So a lot for them is evidence. And how are they collecting those evidence?
Is it perhaps a time to revamp the system where this heavy reliance on a child's testimony can be changed? Because I can't imagine, you know, when you put them into perspective as an adult, having to disclose these very intimate details as a child and violate it in that manner. To do it even once is traumatic.
And we're discussing that. The commissioner and I recently were in Jamaica along with a team looking at exactly that, at how do we create a separate center that will focus, and then what all would we need to do in terms of making this work. So I think we're doing a lot of that preparatory work, and it's how do we realize some of these initiatives.
So in the meantime, and I think we hope the right ears hear this conversation, because clearly we have to do enough to get the perpetrators out of their playing field of our communities. But in the meantime, what type of recovery does it take for you to work with? I mean, so you identify they've been abused. What does it take to help them recover?
It takes a lot. Like mentioned earlier, we have to do a lot of counseling. We really need to kind of build the relationship that the child knows that they can trust our officers or social workers, because that's one of the first things. I think, again, it goes back to children thinking that you should respect adults and what adults says is true, but those are the same persons who are hurting them. So we do try to put in a lot of effort in finding safe spaces. For example, if we are removing a child, first and foremost, we will try to find family. But where that doesn't work, we try to find foster placement or foster families that the child will be best comfortable with.
Yeah.
Where they speak the same language, they like the same things, they have maybe children in that same age range, that they have some type of a comfort level. That's one area. And then looking at counseling. Counseling is very big for us because that is what helped the child to understand what has happened and then learning ways of how to cope with it, because it will be there forever. You cannot erase it. So it's building all of that into that child for them to be able to function as they go through this process, and then beyond that.
What's the ethnicity ratio of those that are being abused?
I don't know.
It's mixed depending on geographically
Yeah.
Okay,
where you are. So for the Belize district, it may be predominantly Creole.
Creole.
But if you go north or west, it will be predominantly mestizo.
Hmm.
So by our geographical
Yeah.
breakdown and our ethnicity,
Is there a
it bears
particular
out.
is there a particular age children seem to be more vulnerable? Or is it
The
same?
last data did show that 12 to 16 age range as most vulnerable, but we see children as young as 2 that have been sexually abused.
Yeah.
You know, these are the thoughts that make parents can't sleep at night.
I know.
Yeah.
And even people who don't have children, it's just you get a knot in your stomach thinking about it. Is there anything you can do as a parent to prevent that your child ever has to go through something like
Yeah.
this?
And I have to empathize with parents. Parents have a heavy load on their shoulder
Yeah.
in terms of navigating economically. And I know that parents have to work.
Yeah.
I know that parents
Can't be
come
there
home
everywhere with
and they're
them.
tired. And I know the guilt that parents feel that they have to be away from their children. But I think it's important for parents to recognize that you're doing the best that you can, but that you also have minimum things that you need to do in terms of ensuring their safety.
Right.
Yeah.
And first thing is recognize that not everybody is trustworthy. And so even if they come across as the most charming, wonderful people, helpful, test them to see, if they are trustworthy. Observe how they interact with your children. Are they more interested in touching your children? And, are you noticing things like that? Be cautious. Don't leave your children with anybody for extended times that you don't really know. Make sure that it's people that you kind of know. And when you have left children, because we have to leave our children with babysitters,
Yeah.
we have to leave our children with family members while we work, check in, observe your child, open a communication space with your child and talk to them. How was your day?
Yeah.
And truly listen. I think sometimes we say we're listening, but this new thing, we're on the phone, or we're talking to friends, or we're watching television, or we just want to relax on the bed and have some little time for ourselves, and that's okay. But there has to be that space carved with your child to also listen to them and truly listen. Listen to the nonverbals and listen to the verbals, and create a relationship with your children that they feel safe to talk to you. Monitor your reaction to things, because if you overreact for every little thing, they will look at like, okay,
I won't.
mommy or daddy can't handle if I was to even tell them this.
Yeah.
And you always talk about, and I saw it just now on the screen, that you always believe the child first.
Yes.
Now, we know sometimes kids do things for attention, right? Say outlandish things. How do you get a parent to understand that when they make an allegation of abuse, that you have to believe them, or you should believe them from the first time?
It is important that you do, for the mere fact that you don't want the child to start withholding information from you. You don't want the child to become withdrawn and not to tell you if something is really happening to them, because everything I say, she never believes. And it's simple things you try to start it off. If the child say, I lost my bag today, or I broke my pencil, or simple things, and then you would do the background work to see if any of that is true.
Yeah.
But you have to open the communication. So it's important that everything that they say you listen to. Key word is listen. You have to listen to them first.
And children are smart.
Yeah.
And you don't underestimate how bright your children are.
Yeah.
And they're observing. And that's why we often, through parenting sessions, talk to parents about the relationship between mommy and daddy and how that models to that child what healthy looks like. So sometimes mommy and daddy needs to do a check-in.
Yeah.
Are we a healthy family? And what does healthy mean
Yeah.
in terms of how are we modeling effective communication? How are we modeling how we deal with conflict? How do we model when things don't go as planned? And all of that you're modeling to your children and how they are to navigate. And so it's important that parents recognize that children are observing you.
Yeah.
And they're seeing what you can handle and what you can't. And maybe they're totally flawed in their analysis, but it's important, that's why, to create that space for conversation. And sometimes children ask some hard questions, you know, and we have to be ready for that.
Yeah.
Gone is the day that we don't want to use the word sex. We need to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
naming of body parts.
naming of body
Yes.
parts. No longer what some of the cuckoo and
Cuckoo
cuckoo
and-
and all these.
Yeah, you need to use
You need to
the
say
proper name.
vagina. You need to, and you need to get comfortable saying
using
those
those
words.
words.
Those are body parts.
Yeah.
It's not a shame, and we can't no longer talk about the shame of our sexuality,
Absolutely.
but what is normal
Yeah.
for children as they grow in terms of development, and begin to get comfortable for ourselves, so that we can be comfortable in that discussion with our
In
children.
having- exactly.
Because other people will talk
Yeah.
to them about it. you
Yeah.
know.
All right, so that was a lot of information there, but very critical. And we always want to keep the information relevant, so anybody out there who needs this information knows what they can do and how they can address the problem. We didn't touch much on the other forms of abuse, physical abuse. We'd imagine people kind of know. Neglect, though, I don't, because that's also another one that's kind of hard to name. What are signs of neglect that if you see that in your community, you can make a report?
You could tell children not eating, you see them begging around in your neighborhood, children not attending school, they're not going for immunization checks, so you see they're not feeling well, they are often taken to the doctor, children who are left alone by themselves, to parent younger siblings, parents who you would often hear, because sometimes people would say, we have a culture of speaking very loud, so we would shout and we would yell after our kids, but something is happening there. The parent might be overwhelmed and some form of neglect might be there. So it's important that those are reported to us, at least for us to go in to do a check-in to see if there's any support. Because remember now, we are a ministry of three arms, and so it is not only child protection, but to see what type of support the family might need to kind of bring them to some level of stability.
So you can bring them back on track.
Exactly.
Could you tell us a little bit about the after, though? Because, you know, for instance, they're placed in foster care. What happens when they're 18 to ensure their independence?
Okay, we have, it's a continuum of care, and so children who cannot stay at home are then, we try to identify family. Where that is not possible, foster placement. And then lastly, we would try to put them in a residential care facility. We have children who would turn 14 to 18. We start to develop what we call an independent living plan. So we start preparing them for adulthood, whether it is that they need to do budgeting, they need to look at taking care of a home, continuing their education, taking care of themselves, and just preparing them for what the real world looks like. So we start that from 14.
So for the lack of a better word, you're kind of grooming them into forced emancipation.
Yeah, if you want to
It's
say
the
it like
reality
that.
of life that we all, even as parents, have to prepare our children for adulthood.
For adulthood.
But I could understand that.
And
though.
so even children in care have to be prepared. Sometimes the hardest thing for us is children that are disconnected from their biological families, and how do we support them? You know, the serenity prayer often comes into mind, and how do we accept what we cannot change? And how do we bring children to that place and that reality? And that's hard for us. But we recognize that the absence of biological parents doesn't mean that you're not loved and supported,
Yeah.
and that there are people in the community that would be willing to fill that role. And that's why we do what we do in terms of recruiting of families,
And I was going to say-
recruiting of mentors, and we're doing a call for the community that these children need connection.
Yeah.
And even in the absence of the biological family, you can play that
support
difference
role.
for these
And
children.
that is the perfect point to close off on, because
Yes.
we can call out once again, you know, while people may want to throw a party at a residential facility, ideally what these children need are homes.
Are homes.
And
so
even if you want to do activities like that, what is important for these children are consistency
Yeah.
in terms of building a relationship with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, the one-time activity will be useful, but if you commit to the long haul,
To
to
being a
build that
friend, to
connection
visiting, yeah.
with children, makes
And-
all the difference.
And so you could do respite care, which is weekend and holidays. You could do foster care, which is
And even if
short term and a bit more long.
Yeah.
And then you can move into full adoption too.
Yes.
We always need families in Belize to do this.
Yes,
right?
we
And
do.
even mentoring. Some of these children that she described getting ready for emancipation, they need mentoring. They need business people to guide them. They need coaching in terms of
Yes.
how to navigate the real world, in terms of some of these soft skills, in
Yeah.
terms of representing themselves. You know, if they have to go on a trip internationally, somebody to teach them, you know, this is how you use this fork and this
Etiquette,
knife.
yeah.
And, you know, there's things that you can give
Yeah.
in terms of what are your skills.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in and having this very important conversation with us this morning. Best of luck.
Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
very
All
much.
right. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking to music producer Kendall Simpson. Please stay tuned.